Of Q broadcast, it's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part, there are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
We live in a world where men are told it's harmless. It's just entertainment. But let's stop lying to ourselves. Pornography destroys. It weakens your spirit. It dulls your drive. And it robs you of what real intimacy is supposed to be. Every click is a step away from the man you're supposed to be. We can't call ourselves leaders if we are slaves to a screen.
As someone that is prior service, I know all about discipline. And discipline isn't out there, it's within your mind. Porn rewires your brain, weakens your will, wrecks all of your relationships. It doesn't just stay on a screen, it invades your marriage, your confidence, and your actual purpose. As men, if we don't learn to discipline ourselves, we'll be ruled by our impulses. Now, it is time to stand up and take control before this silent war takes more than you're willing to lose.
Real men don't hide in the shadows of shame. We step up and we protect what's ours. We fight for our wives and kids, our own hearts. Twitter isn't just an app, it's a weapon. It's a tool used to break free and start living like the man that you're meant to be. The battle's here and it starts with you. You can stop living in shame and you can break free today.
Of Q Broadcast, it's taking the world by storm. People are cutting the cord to their high cable bills and moving away from streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and others for something better. Q Broadcast. For just $60 a month, you'll get access to every channel you could ever want, including HBO, Cinemax, and Stars. And the best part, there are no contracts, no hidden fees, and you're free to cancel anytime. With Q Broadcast, you can enjoy streaming live TV, movies, and top series on up to 5 devices at once. Whether you're at home or on the go, Q Broadcast makes sure your entertainment is always at your fingertips. Imagine being able to watch all your favorite channels from anywhere, anytime, without any restrictions. We're talking about thousands of movies, hundreds of TV series, and a huge library of live channels, all in one place. And don't forget video on demand and pay-per-view events. Those are included at no extra cost, so you'll never miss a big event again. Now, take a second and think about your current cable bill. You're probably paying anywhere between $100 and $300 every month, locked into long-term contracts and hit with surprise rate increases. With Q Broadcast, that's a thing of the past. It's just $60 a month. No contracts, no extra fees, no hidden costs, and no price hikes. Why juggle multiple subscriptions like Netflix, Hulu, and cable when Q Broadcast gives you everything you need in one convenient package? People everywhere are switching to Q Broadcast, saving money and getting more content than ever before. So, what are you waiting for? Click the link in the description and sign up for Q Broadcast today. Just $60 a month, no contracts, no hidden fees. It's time to take control of your entertainment and start streaming smarter.
We live in a world where men are told it's harmless. It's just entertainment. But let's stop lying to ourselves. Pornography destroys. It weakens your spirit. It dulls your drive. And it robs you of what real intimacy is supposed to be. Every click is a step away from the man you're supposed to be. We can't call ourselves leaders if we are slaves to a screen.
As someone that is prior service, I know all about discipline. And discipline isn't out there, it's within your mind. Porn rewires your brain.
Here at the Anomic age, we know that these times of uncertainty are stressful. It is incumbent upon all of us to put our fears first and bow down to government tyranny. Gone are the days of freely leaving your home, working, and social interactions. In exchange for safety, we will trade liberty. At the Anomic age, we understand. However, just in case you want to get off your knees and stop being a sniveling coward, check out the John Age Project at anomicage.com.
Meet Ann Morrissey, who is here with her daughter, Dareth. Dareth is 17 years old. Mrs. Morrissey, I don't have to tell you that most parents would be extremely depressed if their daughter came home one day looking like this. I assume that was your response shock, anger, depression? What was it?
I was extremely angry. I really went bananas.
Yeah, how old was she when this happened?
Possibly 13, 14 years old.
We're talking like it's a disease, isn't it?
Well,
Yeah. How did she explain it to you, Mrs. Morrissey?
there was very poor communication until we went into counseling. And it almost broke up our family. But through counseling and Serena, I can understand it better.
What do you understand?
That she feels like she doesn't want to be like everyone else, and she wants to be her own person. And through the dress code and her lifestyle, she's expressing this. It doesn't conform with our rules, but we're learning to cope, and it's a very, very difficult thing. Extremely difficult.
Dareth, let's let you talk for yourself. You're from Long Beach, California.
I just can't handle being like everybody else because that's what everybody else wants, you know. Just because somebody else does something does not mean that I have to do it. You know, I have my own morals and ideals, and I go by them.
Are you drug-free, Dareth?
Yes, I am.
Is this a political statement then? Do you have some misgiving about the society that you see?
Yeah, there's a lot of problems, you know. A lot of the people are really aware of what's going on, you know, and I don't like it, you know. There's a lot of problems. I don't like the way society is based.
What bothers you? Give us some of the misgivings you have.
The rich, the poor, the people starving, the wars, you know. Why can't, you know, everybody just get along and just live their life?
Someone real and Chevy.
truth in a world of lies. You are listening to the John Age Project.
Trust no one. Trust no one. Trust no one.
You found it. You're here. You're headlong down the runaway train that is the Anomic Age. And I'm your host, John Age. Happy to be back with you once again in the Anomic Age. We got a great guest for you today. We got none other than Michael Cremo. But before we get into that, please check out anomicage.com. Please like all the likes, subscribe to all the subscriptions, paypal.me/anomicage, patreon.com/anomicage as well. Those are the best ways you can follow me, help the show, and just check out all the stuff I do. We got all the show links. We got all the interviews, iPhone app, Android app, subscribe by email link, all that and so much more right there at anomicage.com. So please check that out. If you can't do no more, you can do that. So without further ado, I will introduce Michael Cremo. I'm putting his site on the screen right now for you. Michael Cremo, also known as the Forbidden Archaeologist, is hailed as a groundbreaking research pioneer and international authority on archaeological anomalies. His landmark bestseller, Forbidden Archaeology, first published in 1993, has already been translated into 26 languages, challenged the very foundation of Darwinian evolution. Michael continues to dig up enigmatic discoveries in the fossil record and shake up accepted paradigms, exploring famous archaeological sites around the world, journeying to sacred places of India, appearing on national television shows in the United States and other countries, lecturing at mainstream science conferences, or speaking to alternative gatherings of global intelligentsia. All that's going to be found at mcremo.com. You can find all things Michael there. His books, his links, it's all right there at mcremo.com. Thank you so much, Michael Cremo, for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, John. Good to be with you.
Man, it's such a pleasure to speak with you. I can't tell you how many years I've been following your work. I've been following you since our Bell days and George Norrie days, and telling everybody I can about Forbidden Archaeology and your other books as well. So thanks so much. It's been a pleasure to talk with you here for a minute.
Oh yeah, I've been looking forward to this.
Well, this could be an obvious one, but you're obviously new to the audience, first time on the show. What kind of got you into this line of research? Was there a teacher? Was it just sort of going through grade school and the paradigms not really adding up to you? What got you into this line of work?
Well, that's a really good question. I think it has something to do with how I was raised. My father was a military intelligence officer for the Air Force. And that meant a couple of things for me as I was growing up and my siblings. One thing was we were moving to lots of different places. Military families tend to move around. And some were in the United States and some out. And when I was in Germany, in my high school years, I went to an American military high school for dependents of officers and enlisted personnel. And on my spring vacation, I went to Stockholm and I stayed at a youth hostel there. And I met some European kids who had gone overland from Istanbul to India and back. You could do that in those days, quite a number of years ago. A little more difficult these days to do that sort of thing. So So I got exposed to a lot of different cultures. I learned that the American way of viewing things is one way. There are other worldviews that we have to deal with. And so I was open to different cultural perspectives. And I later followed up on those earlier experiences by studying some of the wisdom texts from India. And gradually, I became more and more interested in that, and eventually became the disciple of a guru from India. So, as part of my studies, I looked at the Puranas, which are the historical, cosmological writings of the ancient Vedic culture. And they spoke of a very ancient human presence on this planet, going back a little further in time. And a colleague of mine, a disciple of the same guru, Dr. Richard Thompson, and I discussed this, and we wondered, are these texts simply to be taken on strength of belief or faith, or is there perhaps some factual evidence that's consistent with what these texts and others of other world civilizations have said about human origins and antiquity? So that's what got me into looking at the history of archaeology. In the beginning, I thought, if I look at this, if I look beyond what's in the then current textbooks, which held that anatomically modern humans first came into existence about 100,000 years ago. That was the view in the late 80s and early 90s of the last century. I thought, well, maybe I'll find a few interesting cases, write a short publication, and go on to some other interesting questions. But as I started looking into what I call the primary scientific literature, the original reports by geologists, archaeologists, others digging into the earth, and when I looked at that literature, I found numerous highly credible cases of reports of evidence for human presence going much further back in time than 100,000 years, in some cases, many millions of years. So that posed the question for me, which is, why, if these reports are there in the primary scientific literature and they appear to be aware of and respond to the usual kinds of skeptical objections that are made to such discoveries, what is the reason they're hardly ever mentioned? And here again, maybe it was growing up among people who were involved in the intelligence services. I could understand that, well, yes, there are sometimes areas of knowledge that aren't well known to the average person. So I kind of collected those reports, and Richard Thompson and I published Forbidden Archaeology. And when that happened, I wanted to engage with the mainstream scientific community. So I sent the book to all the main journals of archaeology, anthropology, human origins, history of science. And I was really surprised. So we drew about a dozen major reviews, not all of them negative. Actually, the highly negative reviews, the really dismissive ones, were not published in the standard academic journals, scientific journals. They were published in interest group reports, like Skeptic Society, things of that nature. So, kind of became a little bit of a career for me.
That's crazy. Was there like a certain artifact or a certain discovery that you just went, man, this isn't adding up, and then that sort of just sent you down the rabbit hole?
Yes, there was. It was the California gold mine discoveries that were made around the time of the gold rush in California in the mid-19th century, mid to late 19th century. And in their activities, which included drilling deep tunnels into the sides of mountains or vertically into them, resulted in discoveries of human bones and human artifacts in widely separated places in the Central California region, Tuolumne County, Calaveras County. And these discoveries were reported to the scientific world by Dr. J.D. Whitney, Josiah D. Whitney, who was a Harvard University trained geologist who became the chief government geologist of California. So he initiated his studies. He collected artifacts from others who possessed them and did his own research. And he concluded that these discoveries indicated a human presence going very far back into the what's then called the Tertiary period, which starts now about 5 million years ago and goes back 65 million years, 60 million years or so. So he was aware of many of the types of objections that his colleagues would make. So anticipating that, he included in his reports discussions of the possibility of hoaxing. He discussed the possibility of fissures, objects coming into the very ancient layers in which they were found that dated back to the Eocene period, which modern geologists attribute the date of, say, about 50 million years to. So the reports were very detailed. They responded to all of the usual kinds of objections that might be made in such cases, earth movements, fissures, mistaken observations, hoaxing, things like that. So I thought, well, this is, I've never heard of this before. So it was really kind of an eye-opener. And what was even more interesting to me is that in his footnotes, he referred to discoveries that were made by other prominent European scientists. Dr. Carlos Ribeiro of Portugal, he was the chief government geologist of Portugal, and others as well. And then from those footnotes, I tracked down the original sources of those reports, and again was amazed by the quality of them. So the usual types of skeptical objections were considered and I think effectively problematized.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this a little bit, but what was the reception from academia to your work? Because I feel like in academia, they usually want to dismiss everything out of hand that doesn't fall into their narrative or, you know, the multi-billion-dollar academia industry, really.
Well, it's interesting. I think the best answer for that, I've got a couple of answers, but the best one is the reviews that were published. And as I said, there were some highly negative, dismissive types of reviews, but there were also the mainstream reviews in the standard scientific journals were not necessarily agreeing with me. I don't want to give that impression that they were endorsing me or my views, but they were pointing out positive aspects of it. For example, there was Dr. Murray, Tim Murray from Australia, archaeologist and historian of archaeology. He wrote in British Journal for History of Science that this book offers, it's good material for bringing to light different important questions in the epistemology of our discipline. And, you know, he said it was pretty amazing from that perspective that it raised these kinds of issues. And he said, the dominant paradigm is changing, will continue to change, and what role Vedic archaeologists, the Vedas, would play in the development of archaeology is a matter for individual scientists to determine. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a very enlightened position. Excuse me.
Certainly. Yeah, it seems like they have so much invested. I mean, in the going paradigm of Darwinian evolution, you know, everything from the origin of species on is seemingly pushed this one narrative of this is it. and you know, they've got institutions, they've got I couldn't even calculate the billions of dollars as far as the total institutions and the textbook companies and everybody's job behind all this. So they seemingly have to really keep pushing this narrative of, you know, a couple 100,000 years tops, first Homo sapiens on the scene, and then, you know, ignore the text like yours and the others.
Yeah, well, they're not quite ignoring it because they did comment extensively on it.
Yeah. I guess I just don't want to push that as an alternative to the current narrative then.
Well, it depends. Basically, I see two groups in the archaeological world. The archaeology singular group and the archaeology's plural group. The singular group believes there's one standard objective science of archaeology that has uncovered essential truths that aren't going to change. They may be modified a little bit, but basically we've got it. And that's all there is to it. That's archaeology. Mm-hmm. That's one group. And members and members of that group tend to reject what I have to say. They don't want to hear it. They don't want anyone else to hear about it. And I think my analysis is that's because of a prior commitment they have to a kind of strict physicalism or materialism in science. And that makes them sensitive to anything that might challenge that. Now, the second group is what I call the archaeology's plural group. They're prepared to recognize that different cultures and civilizations and peoples may have archaeologies based on different epistemological and ontological commitments. In other words, there may be an Australian Aboriginal kind of archaeology, a Native American Indian type of archaeological perspective, or even a Vedic perspective, perhaps. So they're prepared to admit that. And I would say it's members of that group are, it's a good number of them. They represent a substantial fraction of the archaeological world. They're prepared to listen to alternative perspectives. I'm not saying they're going to be persuaded themselves, but at least they're willing to listen, which I think is a very positive step. It's scientists in that group who have published reviews that aren't entirely negative about my work. They've accepted proposals of papers that I presented at meetings of the World Archaeological Congress, the European Association of Archaeologists. They've invited me to speak at universities all over the world, and representatives of leading scientific institutions like the Royal Institution in London, the Russian Academy of Sciences in Moscow, have invited me to address their organizations. So I think that's a sign that at least people are willing to listen to a case if it's presented rationally and in respecting their methods for establishing truth, what's factual. There was one review of Forbidden Archaeology that was published in the journal Geoarchaeology. There's a prominent geologist who authored the review. He said, "We've never seen anything like this before. This must be some kind of creation literature, but it's unlike anything I've ever seen before or my colleagues have seen before, in that it's well written, it's well documented, and and then he kind of went on to explore it and point out what he thought the shortcomings of it were. So I'm not saying he was completely endorsing the idea of it, but at least he was recognizing it as a part of discourse and the disciplines related to human origins. So they weren't completely silent.
Yeah.
Now, the members of that first group, the archaeology singular group, which I also respect, for their discipline and focus on getting things right. I think that's something that's indeed worthy of respect and emulation even. Because I think for an alternative view to gain any real traction, that group has to be persuaded also, not just the group that's willing to accept different archaeologies with different epistemological and ontological commitments. I think the archaeology group is one science with their extreme attention to conducting excavations, theorizing about them in a highly disciplined way. They also need to be persuaded.
Yeah, definitely. What's it like out there to interact with with archaeologists / anthropologists in America versus those in Europe or in Australia or even the Asiatic countries? I mean, is it a more receptive view, or is it more more receptive here? I don't know. I kind of get the idea that it's kind of more receptive in other countries to alternative notions of history than it is here in the United States. I mean, just sort of ad hoc looking at stuff like UFOs and looking at stuff like that in other countries. I think they're more receptive to that sort of thing. I don't know what your perspective on that was.
Yes, I think it is true. I've never been able to present a paper at the Society for American Archaeology. So that's the SAA. So, so I found that in other countries like England, I was able to interact with scientists and archaeologists at a higher level than I am in the United States. Now, in the United States, I think in terms of reaching out to different publics, it's been easier in some ways than in the European countries. But in America, because of the cultural conditions here and the conflicts that have historically arisen between what are called creationists and evolutionists, they've kind of set themselves in opposition to each other, and for reasons that perhaps aren't entirely scientific, they stick to their guns. So I guess it has a political aspect to it in this country that's really been persistent for a long time. So that you don't find that in some of the other countries and other parts of the world. But yeah, it is true that I have been able to engage in discourse in venues that are much higher. I've never spoken before the American Academy of Sciences. I've spoken before the anthropology department of the Russian Academy of Sciences. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is a difference.
I wonder if it's if it's the materialism that America is so materialistic, and also that we've seemingly as a nation strayed so far from any true spirituality. I think a lot of Mexico, South America, Central America, and especially Asiatic and India, they seem to have that still intrinsic baseline of knowing that there's a higher something, whatever it might be. I think they seem to be more receptive to that consciousness shift than America. And it seems like America is very dogmatic, and it's either super spiritual or it's all X's and O's, and it's all, DNA and protein molecules and so forth.
Well, even Darwin recognized consciousness as a problem. So I think that's what it ultimately gets down to, the ontological commitments one has. He said the origin of consciousness is almost as big a conundrum as the origin of life. And he said these are problems for future generations of science in the distant future. And, the distant future has come and there's still problems. There's maybe about 40 different theories of how life came from chemicals. There's no single theory that is accepted by the majority of scientists involved in cognitive studies. It's wide open. I attend and I speak at major international conferences on science, cognitive studies, and I hear from them directly. One scientist stood before the whole audience in a plenary lecture, said, we talk about conscious experience. We have millions of conscious experiences every day. And said, but how many of them have we actually explained?
Mm-hmm.
Zero. So they're not making a lot of progress in that regard. And another thing is that, and this relates back to the archaeology and some of the earlier discoveries I was mentioning. When Darwin first proposed the origin of species, he didn't say anything about human beings coming from apes. That would have been too controversial. He said I'd be in enough trouble for what I was proposing, kind of getting God out of the picture of the origin of species, inventing some kind of mechanism that would rule that out. But the other scientists understood you can't make an exception for human beings. Mm-hmm. So they were immediately looking for some kind of missing link between ancient Miocene apes and anatomically modern humans, something in between. They didn't have it. They were looking for it. But what they were finding wasn't evidence for some intermediate being. They were finding evidence for anatomically modern humans. Like Whitney was finding it, Ribeiro was finding it, dozens of other scientists were finding it. And they didn't actually come up with a credible missing link until the 1890s, when a Dutch researcher, Eugene Dubois, discovered some fossils at a place called Trinil in Java, which was then part of Indonesia, a Dutch colony at that time. And when that discovery, which was just one human-like thigh bone and one ape-like skull that were found in a deposit about 50 feet apart, with hundreds of other fossil animal bones. He put them together and said, this is our missing link, Pithecanthropus erectus. And but it was about 800,000 years old. So when that became widely accepted at the beginning of the 20th century in the world of science, then they had to decide, well, what are we going to do with all of this evidence we discovered prior to the missing link? That's human, because humans come after the missing link, after 800,000 years. That it just kind of disappeared. And when anything like that was discovered again, it was either ignored, dismissed, re-explained in such a way that it fit the dominant paradigm, or well, that sort of covers it. Either missed or made to fit. And I can give a fairly recent example of that. In 2016, researchers at Olduvai Gorge in Africa published something in Nature Communications about the OH83 finger bone. And that may sound like a really minor discovery. It was actually like this finger bone, on the little finger. It was found in layers of rock 1,800,000 years old. So they did a careful, multivariate statistical analysis of detailed measurements of the bone, the finger bone, and the results were compared with the same finger bone and different species of apes, and hominids, and anatomically modern living humans. So it wasn't like any chimpanzee, gorilla, orangutan, not like any species of ape today. It wasn't like that of any previous hominid, like Australopithecines, the early Homo species. It was exactly like anatomically modern human finger bones of that location. So in the report, they said this OH83, or 86 actually, OH86, Olduvai hominid 86, it's anatomically modern Homo sapiens in its affinities. But obviously we can't call it Homo sapiens because of the age of formation which was found. So it was made to fit. You couldn't just as well take it as evidence for, if an anatomically modern human had been there, they would have left. If that finger bone was from one of them, it would fit. So, it gets very interesting when you study the details of these things.
So it sounds like at best they're sort of making stuff fit the paradigm. I mean, I've heard similar stuff with the Java man find that it was actually just a Homo sapien 2, the femur and the skull cap there, but I don't know. I wonder how much of the quote unquote big discoveries have actually just been kind of pushed into the box, putting the square peg in the round hole, so to speak, just to make it fit the narrative. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that does happen. Yeah, in the case of the femurs from Trino, they were examined in the 1970s by a team of British researchers, physical anthropologists, and others, and they concluded that they're indistinguishable radiologically, in terms of the bone structure, every way of investigating them led them to say these are non-different from anatomical modern human specimens. And they're different from the Homo erectus specimens that have been found up to the point they conducted their study. So, yeah, you could argue that there was coexistence of these two types of hominids, one resembling modern human, another resembling a more ape-like creature. And this is something for a couple of things that have occurred in the development of modern archaeology and physical anthropology that mirror some of the points that we made in forbidden archaeology. And the 1990s, there was a more linear picture of archaeology with one hominid turning into the next, turning into the next, so that there was only one existing at any particular point in time. But over the decades, the more majority view has become it's like a branching bush with several hominid species existing at the same time. And the early 1990s, when we first published Forbidden Archaeology, that was a pretty radical idea we had, that we look at the evidence of fossil discoveries of humans and human ancestors in China, that area of the world. And it seemed like they had a lot of different species coexisting at the same time. And that is now the mainstream majority view that we had, say, during the late Pleistocene in Europe, and Eurasia, actually, the whole continents of Europe and Asia. There were the Denisovans, there were the Neanderthals, even different varieties of Neanderthals, the West European ones, the Eurasian ones, early Homo sapiens. There are a whole bunch of them. It's an increasing number. I didn't even name all of them. So, and plus they've been pushing the age of anatomically modern humans back by about 100,000 years each decade.
I put those images of the Java Man specimen on the screen for everybody to check out, because those are pretty wild. I've seen a cast of the Java Man femur, and it's weird. It's got the big pathology on there. They put it on the screen. Got the big pathology on there and the skull cap. So that's what you're seeing on the screen, folks, is the Java Man femur, the tooth, and the skull cap from the Java, Indonesia find. Yeah, do you think this is like well, I guess it is obviously like an institutional thing. I was going to ask you what role you think the Smithsonian and the British Museum, I feel like both of those, one side of the pond versus the other are kind of the two biggest control mechanisms over what the general public perceives to be our archaeological past. I think most people, go on a tour to the British Museum, go to the, the DC museums, and they sort of think, okay, this is it. This is what we've been taught. And this is what the quote unquote experts have laid out before us. So this is it. I think that's kind of as far as controlling the paradigm, academia, the textbooks are one thing, but I think just the average Joe just going to a museum is going, these guys got it all figured out. And here's the really short, condensed, we can get this done in the time of a sitcom and a TV commercial version of history.
Yeah, well, the problem is when people go into the big museum of archaeology, whether it's the Smithsonian or the British Museum, they're not seeing everything that's in the museum, actually. They're seeing a carefully selected and curated portion of the evidence that supports dominant paradigm. What I've tried to do in my work is kind of take the locks off the doors of the other rooms of that museum, where you're going to find evidence that not only doesn't support the current dominant paradigm, but actually contradicts it and points to the need for a new one. So I can give a couple examples, say, about the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Whitney in California made these fantastic, well-documented discoveries of human artifacts, human bones in the California gold mining region. And he published through Harvard University a massive study of them, which is it's worth reading even today. Now, a scientist with the Smithsonian Institution, Dr. William B. Holmes, an anthropologist, physical anthropologist, he took objection to Whitney's discoveries, mainly on the basis of Java Man. Because Java Man became the missing link. That means anything human had to be after Java Man at 800,000 years. So anything human shouldn't be found in layers of rock in California, millions of years old. According to modern calculation, about 50 million. So what he wrote in Smithsonian Institution publication was that, if I'm paraphrasing very little, it's almost an exact quote, but if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of evolution as we understand it today, meaning the 1890s, if he understood the theory of evolution, he would not have announced the conclusions that he did in his book, despite the imposing array of evidence with which he was confronted. In other words, if the theory went against the dominant paradigm, the Darwinian evolutionary paradigm, then shouldn't have been published. And using the influence of his position there in the nation's capital and the Smithsonian, he was able to pretty successfully discredit or marginalize Dr. Whitney, who was out there in the provinces in California. So, yeah, there is that kind of influence. And one thing is that the artifacts from the California gold mines, some of them are still in the collection of the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California in Berkeley. They're not shown to the public. That's what I mean. There are other rooms in the big Museum of Archaeology that most people aren't aware of. And this gets back to how I was raised and being raised among people in the intelligence services. I understood from early life that there are facts that are not accessible very easily to a member of the general public. More or less have to trust whatever's coming to you through the official channels. So that's there. So I knew they were there, so I wanted to see them. And of course, you have to make a research request. And fortunately, I had made a proposal to the World Archaeological Congress to present a paper based on the California gold mine discoveries and the issues related to them. That was accepted for presentation at one of their congresses. It was actually being held in Washington in maybe 2006 or something. But what I had to do was, they said, well, you have to specify what the catalog numbers are of the artifacts that you want to see. So at that time, their catalog wasn't digitalized. And so I had to go to the museum, go through their card catalogs, which would be impossible to do if you didn't know exactly where the site was, who the discovery was. I did it, made the research request. It was accepted, but the artifacts aren't even kept in the museum itself. They're kept in a storage building a couple miles away. So the average person is not going to say,
yeah,
hey,
the
let me
average
see.
person's never going to get to even fact check this stuff, so to speak.
Yeah. So I'm not saying it's a conspiracy to suppress real facts, that if the public knew about it, that they would disbelieve in our theories. I don't think that's what the people involved in this are doing. They're thinking we're just being responsible custodians of, and we can't display everything, so we're keeping this. It's an individual, my scientist employed at the museum might say, I don't know exactly what's wrong with this, but I'm sure if I went down the hall and spoke to my colleague, he'd be able to tell me exactly why this isn't considered very reliable evidence for any kind of antiquity of human beings in North America. But even though it's not necessarily a conspiracy to suppress true evidence, the effect is just the same as if it were.
Yeah, I kind of wonder, and this kind of has been kicking around in my brain for a while, but who we are as a people and where we came from. I think these are just like primal, ingrained questions that everybody comes to at some point in the game. So, in many regards, I think whether it's real or imaginary that they're doing this for some conspiratorial means, I mean, it's definitely affecting the whole consciousness of the public, because the whole public thinks, or not the whole public, but the vast majority of the general public probably thinks, okay, well, it is what they said it was. The 1859 origin of species spurred this paradigm shift, and we all just miraculously appeared in this morass from nothing, and billions of years later evolved into these weird complex, carbohydrates and protein molecules and everything of today. But I kind of wonder if, I think it's hurting our consciousness more than helping it, I think.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right about that. Like, if you listen carefully to what I said, I would say it's not necessarily in every case a satanic conspiracy. I didn't say there wasn't any. Said that any individual may be in the position of just being a student and accepting that when you go to a state or government funded educational institution, you're getting authorized knowledge. That isn't to say that there aren't people within these disciplines that are in positions where they do know the implications of all of this, and they are very much aware of the possibilities. Because as you were pointing out, maybe not so directly, but our sense of identity, if somebody is able to dictate to us our sense of identity, how we identify as a person, then their work is practically finished. Because once you accept that sense of identity, it influences your values, your goals, your objectives and purposes in life. it has a huge effect. For example, if I think I'm an American man, then I behave like that. If I think I'm something else, I behave like that, have values like that. So I think, and in their world of science, there are hierarchies of influence and discipline. You have some people who are, maybe just I won't say just, but maybe a student who later become a teacher in a small college or somewhere. And then you have people who are going to Harvard. They're being brought into committees where government leaders, scientific leaders, and educators make education policy, make huge decisions about funding. That $1 trillion of funding is going to astrophysicists to build something better than the nuclear bomb. There's all kinds of things like that going on. I think that's the result of some basic decisions that were made about science 5 or 6 centuries ago in Europe. Basically, if you go back to that time, you'll see that the world of science, as we call it, included all kinds of things that are presently excluded from it. Alchemy, vital forces, paranormal powers, witchcraft, it's the whole panoply of ideas that were being investigated. But at a certain point, because some scientists wanted the support of government, there were monarchies mostly at that time, but they wanted to have chartered, government-supported education and scientific institutions. And some influential scientists decided, as scientists, as a group, we are going to concentrate on ordinary matter operating according to mathematically describable, predictable laws. And we're going to stay away from all this astrology and alchemy and all of this esoteric kind of stuff. And they did it. They did it. And it was very lucrative, very profitable for science as a discipline, because they were able to come up by understanding how ordinary matter operates in a very precise and predictable way. They were able to develop a great deal of control over matter. They were able to manipulate it in such a way as to make technologies that were valued by governments, in particular weapons. They were able to improve the efficiency and lethality of all kinds of weapons. And they were also able to provide technologies that companies like, because they could manufacture and sell these things to the general public. Of course, the general public bought into it. Yeah, we've got now the benefit of all these technologies to help us live in a different way. Pharmaceuticals, medicines for that industry. It was very lucrative. And gradually over time, it's developed in such a way, I think particularly during and after World War I. Up to that time, scientists were generally individuals working in their labs with a couple of assistants and coming up with these fantastic discoveries. But as the world became more and more technologically developed as a result of the type of scientific focus that had become prominent, then they saw the need not for individuals who might take years to discover something. They needed to have teams of scientists working together on government projects, government funded projects that would deliver on a schedule. So it became important for the scientists and the government leaders to tell education, we want a standardized product. We want somebody who can be part of a team, work in a team. And that's why you see most scientific papers today, they have 50 or 60 authors.
That's true.
There's usually be Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin. Now it's a few leaders and 50, 60, 70, 200 others involved in it because they're a team. The kinds of things that they're developing require that and required education, and universities be able to produce those engineers, those scientists, those people like that who would work in those teams for government and industry sanction means. Like most universities today have become like the R&D departments for government and industry.
Yeah, the military industrial complex again.
Well, now even they have the military entertainment complex.
That's the truth.
These computer games that people play, it all comes out of military technology for training tank commanders and jet fighter pilots how to function in very complex realms they have to deal with today. So it's it's been very successful. It's generated a lot of wealth. The wealth flows in certain directions, and it goes. I mean, I don't have to talk about the 1% and the disparities in wealth and influence that people have, but it was very profitable, you could say, but it was at the expense of having a complete picture of reality. That's why they're not able to solve the problem of where did consciousness come from. It didn't come from any combination of matter. It comes from some other source. Origin of the bodies of living things. How did they come about? They haven't got a clue at the present moment. Not say no clue, because if you read the technical journals, you'll see they think they're getting bits and pieces of it, but nobody's come up with an overall explanation of it, or how one species actually changes into another. And so not only these intellectual shortcomings of it, it's like you get a computer kit. Some people like to build their own stuff. Some parts are missing from the kit that you get, and the instruction book is thrown out. And no matter what you do with the pieces that you have, you're never going to get a working computer out of it unless you get the new parts and you get the instructions how it all fits together. So science it's like a game that's played by certain rules. And the two major rules that came about 500 or 600 years ago are no non-material substances, no guiding intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And I will say, though, they will never figure it out until they bring back those elements. Now, so they get a lot, but it's at the expense of having a complete picture of reality. I would like a science that deals with everything that's possibly true about the world we live in. So, if you're going to a priori rule out so many possibilities, think, well, you can do that. You can play the game by those rules, but you should admit that it's at the expense of having a complete picture of reality. And there are also many social and political anomalies. When people identify in that way, they think that to produce and consume more and more material things is the main purpose of human existence. And they do that in competing groups, because according to that view, we're basically machines made of molecules in competition with each other for survival, individually and collectively. And that competition is over the control of resources of material nature and control over the molecular machinery of the biological entities around us. In other words, we take the control of other living beings and try to take control of as much of the material resources as we can, which creates violence on every level of human society, individual basis, class basis, gender basis, racial basis, nationality basis, you name it, it's there. And it also results in unsustainable exploitation of natural resources. So I think there's some reasons to consider another sense of identity, which I like to call the identity of being of we're all beings of pure consciousness. That there's something that consciousness is not a temporary byproduct of bioelectrical activity in the brain. Rather, it's something fundamental with its own existence. And there's no need to divide ourselves up into competing groups on the basis of superficial characteristics of our physical bodily vehicles. And the final point is that we can learn how to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, efficient, and fair way possible, and put most of our human energy into developing consciousness. So that would mean, if we had that identity, that would mean a different set of political, social, economic, military, scientific, educational institutions be based on a different principle altogether, which means that the current set of institutions and the current set of ways in which different groups of the population benefit from that arrangement would shift. And I think that's why there's resistance ultimately to the kinds of alternative ideas that I and many others have been exploring. So, so I think you're right. There is an element of complicity in worldviews that has big effects on our lives individually and collectively. That's behind this focus on matter, the idea that we're in a matter-based universe versus a consciousness-based universe.
And it's weird in academia. I mean, you've seen it behind the curtain too. The sort of obvious push to move anything supernatural or paranormal or spiritual like out of the picture. You know, although many of the founding fathers of those institutions were very interested in that. I was thinking like Carl Jung being interested in all sorts of things like that. But I think the irony is, as humans, we're kind of hardwired towards still drawing into that spirituality because, you know, in anthropology and archaeology departments, they sort of deify Darwin. They have Darwin Day every time it's his birthday. They've got like a big cutout of Darwin in the rooms. They've got his book everywhere as if it's some sort of holy book. And then they've got a lot of the, I guess you could call them demigods beneath him, like the big names in academia, like the Leakeys, you know, worshipped all over archaeology like Darwin. It's just sort of this, it's this weird dichotomy that you think on the one hand, they've pushed all this supernatural out. And on the other hand, they're clinging to these sort of very, very, poly, if not monotheistic ideals of religion and supernatural and paranormal. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. John D. Rockefeller Jr. was kind of head of the Rockefeller Foundation after his father, John D. Rockefeller Sr., passed it on to him. So it's interesting that John D. Rockefeller Sr. was originally funding Baptist projects, Baptist missionaries, Baptist schools, Baptist churches, Baptist hospitals all over the world. And it's one reason he made a foundation is that he told his business manager, I can't handle all these individuals coming up to me, set up something.
Mm-hmm.
Do it in a more systematic way. But then John D. Rockefeller Jr. was more influenced by the materialistic science of the time, and he kind of pulled the foundation in a different direction. But there was still a religious aspect to it, in that the foundation made Riverside Church, which was kind of like a temple of science, where instead of statues of saints, there were statues of Darwin, among others.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Where is that? Is that California? Riverside Church?
New York.
Oh, New York. I got you. Very interesting. I had no idea about that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Man. Well, I didn't mean to go way over our time. We're at an hour and 15 minutes, Michael. So I guess didn't mean to go over your time is what I'm trying to say.
I live for this.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely have to pick this conversation up again if you'd like. I'd love to have you back on and get into some more of this stuff. What's the best way people can find your work and support you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's interesting. I've been invited to speak at the Bosnia Pyramid Summer Solstice Festival Conference and Tour in Bosnia, in the Balkan region. So that's kind of interesting. It's an alternative gathering. And I'll be speaking about my ideas there. It's from June 21st. No, June 14th to June 24th. So that's
Nice.
June 4th, June 24th. Also on my website, you'll find available my latest book, Extreme Human Antiquity, Further Research in Forbidden Archaeology. Because people have been asking me for a long time, you know, after your first book, which documented all this evidence, what's come out since then.
Mhm.
So that new book is there. There's also a special offer. If people want to get 5 of my principal works, they can get it for $100. So that's at my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com.
Okay.
So that would be a good place for people to start if they want to know more about my work. But we also have upcoming interviews and lectures. Like when you air this one, we, of course, publicize it.
That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being on the show, man. It's been an honor to speak with you for sure. If you stick around for about 30 seconds here, I'll say goodbye to you off the air. All right. All right, folks, you can't do everything, but you can do something. Please get out there, do your part, make a difference, and I'll be seeing you sooner than later in the Anomic age.
Thank you for listening to The Anomic Age, a John Age project. For past shows, further info, and to comment, go to anomicage.com. That's ANOMICAGE.com. Till next time, thank you for listening to The Anomic Age.